In this video, we are going to talk about the presidential election of 1824. Now, the presidential election of 1824 was unique for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons it was very unique is because it didn't just have two different candidates running against each other. It actually had four main candidates running against each other. And what also made this very unique is that each one of these four guys that were running for president were all running as members of the same political party, the Democratic Republican political party. So, really, in order to understand how this happened, we kind of have to go back and look at some previous elections. If we go back to the election of 1800, that was the election where Thomas Jefferson defeated John Adams to become the third president of the United States, but he became the first Democratic Republican. And so Thomas Jefferson is going to win re-election in 1804. And so he's going to serve for 4 years, and then he's going to step aside. In 1808, James Madison becomes the fourth president of the United States, but he becomes the second Democratic Republican. He is re-elected in 1812. He serves 8 years. And then James Monroe becomes the third Democratic Republican president. And by the time we get to 1816, it's really no longer the Federalists against the Democratic Republicans. The Democratic Republicans have defeated the Federalists so many times that by the time we get to James Monroe's re-election in 1820, there's not really even a Federalist candidate for president. So we basically see the death of the Federalist Party in 1820. And that pretty much leaves us with just one political party, and that's the Democratic Republicans. And so when we get to 1824, instead of there being one Democratic Republican candidate and one Federalist candidate, we just end up with a whole bunch of Democratic Republicans that want to be the president. Now let's take a closer look at each one of these candidates. So first we have John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams is, of course, the son of John Adams. John Adams was the second president of the United States. And John Adams was actually a Federalist. So when his son comes out as a Democratic Republican, some people don't know if he's really a Democratic Republican or if he just knows that aligning himself with the Federalists will never get him elected. So there are some people who are skeptical about his affiliation with the Democratic Republican Party based on the fact that his father was a Federalist. Then, next we have Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, of course, is from Tennessee. His main claim to fame is the fact that he was a general who fought in several wars, but he was very famous for winning the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812. And so Jackson is running as sort of like a war hero. Next we have William H. Crawford. Now he's probably, out of these four guys, the person we would talk the least about in our history class, but when the election gets started, he's actually the guy who is pretty much expected to win. Back in 1820, Crawford had come in second place to James Monroe. And so it was just kind of expected that Crawford would run again in 1824 and he would probably win. But little did he know that he would have so much opposition from his own party. So even though he was, I guess, what some would call the front runner, he ends up sort of falling into, I guess, third place after the election results are seen. Number 4 is Henry Clay. Henry Clay is very important to American history. We're going to talk about him quite a bit in our class. We've already talked about him some. We're going to talk about him even more going forward. The first time we're introduced to Henry Clay in our history class, he is advocating for joining the War of 1812, or starting, I guess, the War of 1812. He's a congressman who we referred to back in our previous lessons as a war hawk. He wanted to go to war with Great Britain. He wanted the War of 1812 to happen. We end up talking about him a little bit later when we talk about the Compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise. He becomes very important with that compromise, and he becomes very important with many compromises going forward. Henry Clay is known as the Great Compromiser. So each one of these guys sort of has a different angle. Crawford was supposed to be the front runner. Henry Clay, the Great Compromiser, who helped work out the Missouri Compromise of 1820. You've got Andrew Jackson, who's the war hero. And then you've got John Quincy Adams, son of second president. All 4 of these guys want to be president, but only one guy is going to actually become the president. So in November of 1824, people across the United States go to the polls to vote for president. They've got 4 main options: John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, William H. Crawford, Henry Clay. If we take a look over here at our electoral map, we will see the results of this election. Andrew Jackson was very popular in the South. As we see, Jackson in blue wins North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. But Andrew Jackson is also popular in some of the Midwestern states, Illinois and Indiana. And believe it or not, he even does well in some of these northern states. He carries Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. Andrew Jackson actually comes out on top with 99 electoral votes. So he's actually the guy who's going to come in first place as far as how many electoral votes each candidate gets. Next, we take a look at John Quincy Adams. He gets a few votes here in the Midwest. He actually gets a few down here in the South. But most of his electoral votes come from New England. Remember, his father was from New England. He was from Massachusetts. John Quincy Adams is from Massachusetts. He's sort of a New England guy, and so that's the region of the country that's going to support him the most. And then you've got the other 2 candidates who came in third and fourth place. So John Quincy Adams, 84 electoral votes. Jackson is first with 99. Third place is going to go to William H. Crawford. He's going to get 41 electoral votes. He is represented by the color, I guess that's orange there. He gets Virginia and he gets Georgia. So, guy from Georgia is going to carry his home state. He's also going to get Virginia. But that's pretty much it. He gets a few votes here and there, but he ends up with 41. And then in last place is going to be Henry Clay. Henry Clay is only going to get 37 electoral votes. And so we're going to finish with 4 candidates who all finish with a nice size of electoral votes, but no candidate actually gets 50%. So even though Andrew Jackson gets 99 electoral votes, that's only a percentage of 41. So he doesn't get to 50%. And so that's going to be a problem for Andrew Jackson. So the fact that he ended up having to run against so many people, even though he's going to be the guy who comes out with the most electoral votes, he's still not going to get to 50%, which means that he is not going to just be able to become president. Since Andrew Jackson didn't get to 50% of the vote, that's going to create a problem. Just after the election of 1800, the 12th Amendment to the United States Constitution was passed. Now, the main reason there had to be new rules created for the Electoral College was because the election of 1800 ended in a tie. At the time, president and vice president were sort of voted on together. So whichever candidate got the most electoral votes became president, and the candidate with the second most electoral votes became vice president. But after the election of 1800, that proved to be a problem, and it needed to be fixed. And so the 12th Amendment attempted to fix that problem. And so what it did was it made president and vice president be voted for on completely separate ballots. That way there would be no tie. But there was another clause in the 12th Amendment that a lot of people forget about. It also stated that if no candidate gets over 50% of the electoral votes, then there will be what is called a contingent election. In this contingent election, each state will get 1 vote. So basically, if no one gets to 50% of the electoral votes, then we pretty much have to start over and have a completely new election. And in this election, there would be 1 vote per state. So no more electoral college, just 1 vote per state. And so in 1825, there was a contingent election for President of the United States. It happened a few months after the original election. Happened in February, on February the 9th, 1825. And only 3 candidates were allowed to participate in this second election. The top 3 candidates. So Andrew Jackson had come in first in the original election. John Quincy Adams had gotten second. And William Crawford had gotten third. Henry Clay, who got fourth, was not allowed to participate in the contingent election. So Andrew Jackson is actually expected to win the contingent election because Jackson had finished with the most electoral votes and also with the most popular votes. So it just sort of seemed as if he would somehow find a victory in the contingent election. But John Quincy Adams had come in second. And he knew that if he could just figure out a way to get some of the votes that Henry Clay had, then he might actually have a chance of getting enough votes to move past Andrew Jackson. John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay started meeting up and having secret meetings. And in these secret meetings, John Quincy Adams was trying to convince Henry Clay to get his former supporters who had voted for him in the original election to now switch from Clay to Adams. If John Quincy Adams could pull this off, he knew that he could become the president. And Henry Clay had enough power within his supporters to be able to flip their votes. And so on February the 9th, 1825, when the states actually met up to vote, these states here in the green, in New England, of course, voted for John Quincy Adams, but so did some of these states in the Midwest and Louisiana. Some of those states had flipped from Jackson now to Adams. And when the final votes were counted, John Quincy Adams came out on top with 13 states representing 54% of the vote. Andrew Jackson got 7 states representing 29% of the vote. William Crawford again finished in 3rd place. But Andrew Jackson, who had originally finished first with the most electoral votes and the most popular votes, now saw himself on the outside looking in, finishing in 2nd place because of what Andrew Jackson ended up calling a corrupt bargain. In these secret meetings, Henry Clay had demanded that John Quincy Adams make him the Secretary of State if he became president. Of course, John Quincy Adams agreed. And so whenever Adams takes office and he makes Henry Clay his Secretary of State, it's pretty well known to everybody, especially Andrew Jackson, that there was a corrupt bargain that had taken place in the contingent election in 1825 to decide the presidential election of 1824. And so this is going to set up a lot of different things. Number one, it's going to sort of end the Democratic-Republican Party. Half of the party is going to side with Andrew Jackson. The other side is going to go with John Quincy Adams. And we're also going to see a rematch because Andrew Jackson is not going to go away. Andrew Jackson is going to continue to campaign. He's going to run for president again in 1828, and there's going to be a rematch between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson.